This is EOF Implementers Call number 66. It is Wednesday, February 5th. And here's our agenda. First, we're going to start with testing updates, go to client computer updates, talk about a proposed testnet plan, and then go through specification issues related to that plan. So first, testing update, general EEST updates. Anything generally from East we need to worry about, Mario?
Hello. I think the most important topic is that I wanted to chat about, or maybe just highlight it, is this PR. I think this has been open for quite some time, but I just um, took a look at it again, rebased it, and refactored it. And I think it's important now because basically it helps us to test the container validation in a transaction. So basically, this converts an EOF tests which were only validated via the consumer of the EOF tests to validate the container itself. Now what it does is basically this wraps the container into a contract creating transaction. And the nice thing about this is that one, we can run it in as a status, and the second one is that we can also now with the DevNet coming up, we can also run it in a live testnet. So we can basically just send every single EOF test that we have, we can convert it into a contract creating contract creating transaction, and send that to the DevNet. And we can see if there's any like consensus splits or any other validation issues that we haven't got when only filling the EOF tests. So yeah, I think this is basically ready. There are some things that I had to modify and some tests that have been left out. Mainly, the main issue is that some containers are just way too big for a init code to be accepted. So these have not been converted. Right now, I'm skipping the full test function because this is the only way that we have to skip things. But I'm working on a marker, and this is going to be a refactoring, a general East refactoring, where we can, so for example, say that you have your EOF test, and some of them can be converted into state tests via the parameterized function, but some others can't. Right now, the entire function has to be disabled for state tests. But with this marker, what we're going to do is just selectively some of the parameterizations, just mark those as non-fillable to a state test. So this is a work in progress. This is just an idea, but at the moment, I think we should be good to merge this as soon as I resolve the conflicts in the PR. A review would be fine, just to just to basically get the thumbs up from you guys that this is what we want. And I can explain further, but I think if you guys can take a look at the implementation as is right now, and then come up with questions to me, that would be absolutely perfect. But yeah, any questions about this? Was the intention clear with what I explained?
Yeah. Are there any arguments we need to do with UV run execute? Do we need to like list a test subset like we would with the other times we run it, like test slash Osaka?
Yeah, that would make sense. So basically, I would UV run execute fork Osaka, and then select the folder. So test Osaka, and that should run every single EOF test that we have. It would run it as a state test on the DevNet. Yeah.
Okay. Because I think I've been fuzzing for specific builds or relative specific builds. Got Geth, Nethermind, Reth, and Besu all fuzzing. So I think we're ready for testnet, but I've been having problems getting the kurtosis set up locally on my machine. It might be because I'm trying to do it locally instead of in the cloud. It might also be because none of the consensus clients are ready to do Fulu without also including PeerDAS. So that's some of the trickiness I'm running into. And it's not set to do a split launch where we would have Osaka on the CL on the EL, but Deneb on the EL, not Deneb, Electra.
So the nice thing about execute is that it has a hive mode. So I could take a look again because this was done quite a while ago. But the nice thing about this mode is that it mocks the CL. So we don't need any CL configured to run full for this, and we can just do like a local run just in Hive, and you can put every single um, execution layer client in here. It will send all
Good.
the EOF transactions, and then you can see consensus splits um, on a EL level only. Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to mess around with that today once I'm done with all my meetings.
Yeah, I haven't taken a look in a long time, but if you run into issues, just let me know. I'll try to help you out. Yep.
Okay. All right. Uh, Pawelon, do you want to talk about converting legacy tests to EESD?
Yes. So I've been doing this for some time now. Like some time ago, months ago, actually, we removed all the state tests that are related to EOF execution. So the only remaining tests that are in the Arch repo are related to validation. And I think there's still some substantial number of these. But I trying to manually convert them to Python tests, and this is manual work because I also want to know what's exactly there and if they make sense at all. Considering we have some time before we going back to in the full DevNet mode. Um, so recently I tried to measure how fast this conversion goes on, and I think it's not it's not incredible. Like rough estimate would, if I doing it alone, I would take another month to finish, maybe half year. So let's see if that actually makes sense to do it this way in the long tail. But yeah, that's more or less the status. The something that is new is that it's relatively easy to take the bytecodes from this um, existing JSON legacy tests and move them to Python. I think that's not a big deal. And I have simple script that does that if someone needs it. And there's also a draft pull request on East that has all of the remaining tests converted. It's just they are just the tests just have a hex bytecode, so it's not really clear what it actually testing besides some obfuscated name it has. Um, but if there's no comments, I think I will continue doing so. If you have some concerns or like better ideas or other stuff, we can discuss now or some other day.
Yeah, can you send me the link to the PR? I can take a look today if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was mostly like for my purpose to um to be, instead of copying the bytecode from JSON, I can copy it from one Python to another Python test. But yeah, I think there's like big amount of tests that are like kind of manual header syntax validation, which is not really useful, I believe, right now. But yeah, I will send you the overview. It also kind of shows how much of these we actually have left.
Okay. The checklist is in the file somewhere.
Oh man, a lot of files.
Yeah. I mean, there's a
Yeah,
lot
it
of legacy
was,
tests and they're fairly opaque.
but many of the files have like one or two tests only, so it depends. I had to move it into individual files because of PyTest, how PyTest work. So it requires some unique module names or something like that. So at
Hmm.
least the file names has to be unique.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
But yeah, that was also a way to remove duplicates that were existing in the legacy repo by itself, and also remove duplicates that were in the East already. So this is already done. And this is more or less the overview of what is left.
I see.
But
So
usually
this
I
would,
take one more example at a time, or like one sometimes error message or error code, and I find all the tests and see how they fit in the other part. So
so this was the reason you asked me about the duplicated EOF containers, right?
yeah, I wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that actually, or I was actually considering, because this, when you mentioned this wrapping EOF test with transaction, right?
Mhm.
There's one more kind of a test that is called EOF state test, which is kind of similar thing, but it mostly is focused on actually executing EOF after validation, but it partly does the same job. I think the difference is that we've been using EOF state test from the beginning, so there's no issue with converting these tests.
So sorry, I got confused. So the EOF tests, state test that you're referring, is this something different that what we have in East,
Yes,
or are you referring the East version to the East version? Sorry.
there's kind of a mixture of EOF test and state test, which is called EOF state test.
But this is East, right? Or this is something
Yeah,
else? Oh,
it's
okay.
exactly.
Yeah, of course. Okay, yeah.
I
And you're talking about the
think,
test that'll do the EOF validation. And if it's valid, we'll try and load the contract and execute it.
yeah, it's just this. It's quite a similar thing that Mario is trying to do with EOF test, right?
Okay.
Yep.
Because I think I don't know the internals, but I think it actually also wraps the EOF bytecode with a transaction and conf, but maybe not. I would need to
Yes.
take a look. It wasn't
Yeah,
really
yeah.
that.
Yeah, if you can take a look, yes, please. I can just briefly explain what I think the difference are. So basically, EOF state test, what it does is already puts the EOF container into the pre-state. So there's no deploy event happening at any point. Whereas
Okay, okay.
the EOF underscore test converted to state test, it basically just creates a transaction with the deployment of the EOF container. So it's very slightly different,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's worth to have like this differentiating factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I just wanted to make sure you're kind of aware of both these because, yeah, but besides that, I'm completely fine with the approach.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Cool. Any other testing updates we need to talk about? All right. Hearing none, we'll go to the next item. Client compiler updates. No real update for Besu. Ref.
Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, still the same.
Not seeing Nethermind, but they did a bunch of fixes over the weekend to make themselves fuzzable, and they did some refactorings, and they're up to date, so they're part of the fuzz now. Geth, I don't see on the call. Marius has started working on his patch again, bringing in some of mine, but he isn't fully up to all of them. Marius's patches still have some fuzzing found bugs in there. Who am I? Gethreth, Nethermind, Besu, EVM1.
No, I don't believe we touched that at all
Okay.
since last call.
ETHJS, Nimbus, Aragon. I don't think we have any other reps on the call, and I haven't been fuzzing any of those. Okay, compiler updates. So we have some from Solidity on. Do you have any updates you want to share?
Okay, so from our side, we are finally done merging the semantic text updates from Radek. So we basically have the whole test suites finally running on EOF. We're also doing the final tweaks, like moving the EVM version to Osaka, so that EOF is tied to Osaka, and then we'll be ready to release. The release should be like in the coming weeks, and then people will be able to test the prototype on that release. Like right now, it can only be tested on nightly. We also want now to prepare a list of like breaking changes for the language that will come from EOF. I'm actually working on that right now, and then we'll gather feedback from people on those changes and decide what to do about some things like those EOF create changes, but also like smaller language changes. And as for what will happen next, we have the low-level bytecode optimizations that Radek is working on. But after that, we want to tackle the new opcodes like dup-n, swap-n to finally resolve the stack to deep so that people can try it out on their code. We want to make unoptimized compilation work and stabilize the assembly output form. And that basically will be like the first stage of the prototype, and then we move to like further features. So yeah, that's it for the update.
Okay, and this would be like via command line flag that says prototype EOF or dev EOF, or would it be implied to be the complete finished one?
I mean, we have like this experimental EOF option that you can use to enable it, and yeah, basically you can test it in the command line compiler or via standard JSON.
Okay. That's good to know because it kind of flows into the next topic we have to discuss. Okay. Anything else? That's some pretty exciting Solidity stuff, to be honest. All right. Charles isn't on the call. Are there any other compiler or developer tools people on the call? Okay. Hearing none. Let's see. I will go on to the next part, which is the testnet plan. So as mentioned, we're getting to the part where we need to start shipping it into the testnet. And I put together and kind of socialized with some people, the testing group, and people who asked what my thought of what testnet going forward would look like, what our plan towards an end game would be. This is something we'll probably need to talk about on ACD tomorrow or next week. So I want to run it by everyone on this call before I give it to a broader audience. The first step is what I call Osaka Zero, which is we ship what we had specified for Pectra with no changes. We're almost there. We have the clients ready. I just need to get kurtosis working, or we need to get the final Kubernetes stuff set up and run. But I don't think there's any changes to code we need to do to start an Osaka Zero. We might find some bugs related to contract creation transaction, but that's why we run this. So we got Pectra 6. It shouldn't be changing anymore. Everything's merged up current with that with the 4 clients that we have. So I feel very comfortable with that there. And I put some exit criteria. 3+ clients pass all yield. It's actually 4 right now. Testnet, that's what we're going to find out. 24-hour fuzz, we're already done with 3 of the test clients. I haven't been running container fuzzing, but I need to turn that back on. But that's another thing. And then if we do all those from the same commit, I think we can put a bow on testnet 0 and say we have a success. The real work starts happening in this, it's going to ship as soon as possible. The next step, I think, is Osaka 1. And we mentioned earlier in some of the calls that we needed to do some base level changes that we want to do to improve the ergonomics. So I'm thinking in those that might impact things like compiler layouts and some end user tool interactions. So my thought is we pack every single one of those into the first testnet after testnet 0, and we get them done with. And we freeze major portions of the spec, except for features we're going to add and stuff like Osaka 2 later on. So the idea is Osaka 1 would be the stable base that Solidity can work off of and have strong assurances we're not going to change it unless there's some existential problem with the spec. We're not going to move stuff around because we can. We'll only move stuff around because there's a demonstrated type safety or security bug. It would need to be a serious bug for us to consider changing it. So the things on the list to clean up, we're going to change the EOF create hashing like we've been talking about for the past couple months. And we're also looking at some of the other changes that are in EOF and Epsilon 165. Stack height of the section, stack arg order, change the name of an opcode, change the name of a data section. And there's also a more involved proposal from, here we go, the Powell put together. And I want people to get a chance to read this, but I think one curveball I'm going to throw at you, Powell, is we need to consider large containers. So we need to get this logical plan to deal with the idea that we might need to have containers that are larger than 64K. Whether it's a 4-byte container, if we just use another header, or how we would handle that, that is TBD. That's something that I think we need to put in with this consideration, so we can uncap the contract size based on code size limit, based on the gas limit rather than based on some arbitrary code size limit. But this is what I think we need to, these are the sort of things that we need to fix in Osaka DevNet 1. And this is our one window to change base level things before we close the door and freeze the spec. Oh, and also one other thing with create 2 is an exceptional halt. Undo some of that spec changes. So again, I would say that the same exit criteria. Once we do the changes, we need to update all the EOF tests and get all the clients testing the EOF tests. Stay in sync in the testnet and fuzz for 24 hours on both kinds of fuzzing. And that's when we would be able to say, okay, we passed testnet 1, and then we can send out a signal to compilers and developer tools that these things are only changing in the event of a security level bug. So that's what we would be looking at. Let me copy this URL that just came in the browser, but this is Solidity. So after that, we would have what I would initially call Osaka 2. We would call Osaka 2 to whatever. And the idea here is that we do value added features. Now, the first one does change something in the base layer, but I think we put it in something to be severable because we could live without it, but we really want it. And I think we need to get some feedback from some of the tooling teams and some of the other core developers before we commit to changing that in the base. But I think that's the only exception here. Everything else here is additive. The idea is that if you can parse and run Osaka 1, anything that worked in Osaka 1 will work in Osaka 2, unless you're not handling one of the new features. But it's not going to change core definitions other than just adding things that wouldn't be there. We're not going to change numbers again. We're not going to change orders of things. If anything is put in, it's going to be additive. And this I view as the priority order. We would implement these and test these and ship these in this order. So if it takes long and we're behind on some of these and it comes August, September, and there's pressure to ship because PureDAS is ready, we can just put a bow on it and ship it and move everything else out to a future fork. So the intent here is to make something shippable. Whenever the call to close the fork comes, we close it and we ship it and push everything else out until later. So the first two features are kind of related. The TX create, return the TX create transaction. We've been talking a lot about that with Toehold contracts. That's going to be the first thing we're going to bring in. And what that opens the door to is to remove the contract creation transaction. And this is where we're going to need to speak with tooling providers like Foundry and not Truffle anymore, but Hardhat and all the other developer tooling people to make sure that they can handle that EOF is going to have a different way to deploy contracts. It's going to be an actual transaction, getting a new transaction type. That shouldn't be too scary for them, as long as they know it's coming. And we want to make sure that they're willing to get that in a reasonable time rather than relying on the old contract append and ship method. That's going to work fine with the current setup. But the idea is we want to remove EIP 7698 and keep contract create transaction the way it was. Or if it starts with EF, then the transaction's invalid and won't be shipped without any consideration of parsing. So that goes back to the original idea before we had to make this compromise again into Pectra, that all EOF comes in via a transaction. So essentially we've got contract deployment. The quirk there is we're going to need to be able to pre-deploy a contract that is EOF as part of the fork. And as I mentioned last week, with the changes being proposed for the identity precompile, I think that opens the door for us to do there what's going to be done for precompile contract number 4, which is to bring contract code that defines what's going in there specifically. So it also depends on that and core developers, which is why it's listed as a value add. If needed, we can cut it if there's pushback, but I'm going to push back against the pushback if we get that. And then after that, we get the strictly additive features that I think we should try and get in the first rev. The metadata section, a request from Sourceify. EXT code type, this is something we need to fix ERC 721s. And also the EXT code address EIP, where we can detect the delegate of it. This is so OpenZeppelin can create a safe proxy. And I think these features, I think this ideally, if I had to pick a point where we say this is what we should ship as V1 and ship it, and if necessary, pressure period has to be ready. Return the pressure on the other side of the fork. I think this is the point where we flip over to say, hey, we're ready. Are you ready? And the standards here, I've upped it to 4 clients, and I've added a few other things. We need to add transaction fuzzing as well. We need to add transaction fuzzing, make sure we can get the new transaction format. And we need at least 1 or more compilers to produce EOF contracts. Looks like it's going to be Solidity. Looks like they're in a good place to do that. But we need developer tooling before we can come out of Osaka testnet 2 of some sort. Maybe we put in also a stack like Foundry or Hardhat that would also support producing these contracts. That's something we could consider to add to the exit criteria. I would like to ship this April, May. So when it comes time for Protocol Berg in Berlin, we'll basically say that we're ready to ship and we're ready to harden it. Looking at getting a get together sometime at Protocol Berg with people who are implementing. It's kind of a nice checkpoint. There might be other gatherings that we might be contacting people. But the idea is that in Berlin Blockchain Weeks, those 2 weeks is going to be a nice mid checkpoint because Berlin's before ECC, so it gives us a little better. The one twist in this is that at some point, core dev process is going to make a Osaka. What I'm proposing is Osaka only changes. And when they want to merge Fulu and Osaka together, it's pretty good this time because Fulu and Osaka do not have changes that rely on each other yet. Like when previous forks, like Denkun, the withdrawals absolutely needed both sides to work. Same thing with Pectra. But with Fusaka, I think we've gotten to the point where we're mostly just connected. So at some point they're going to want to join it. And I think a good point is when we're at Osaka 1 or Osaka 2 or after. Osaka 0 would be a bad one to do the merge. But if we want to start doing merge testnets, that's when we would start doing it. And it's kind of independent of where we're at. And that's where if they want to do a testnet where we might cut some items out of scope so we can do a Fusaka testnet and add it for later testnet. There's some targets of opportunity that I think we should implement, but not required for V1. If Osaka drags into 26, knock on wood, let's hope that doesn't happen. We might want to look at seriously looking into the contract size limit increases and defining that. And then also the create delegate opcode. Kind of unrelated to EOF, but I think it's a really neat feature that's once we see if there's good 7702 uptake, that's going to be really useful in the smart contract side. Now, there's other features that we need to discuss and add or not add, but I think there's out of Fusaka scope for a number of reasons. One is the potential of returning EXT data, of creating an EXT data copy and EXT data size opcodes. I think we want to get at least 1 fork cycle without it to see if we truly need it, to see what the pain point is. And the same goes with tweaking gas introspection, which I totally spelled poorly. Let me go down there. This is what happens when you write things in the middle of the night. We've got some feedback that some clients still might need gas introspection as an anti-abuse, anti-spam measure. But I think we should see what it looks like for at least another cycle before we decide what we're going to do, whether we keep the design as is and rely on the legacy bridge, or whether we restore gas or the gas in the old call opcodes, or if there's a completely different solution. This is another area where we might need to revisit. And that goes with the design decision for how we're implementing gas introspection. If we're wrong, we just return the opcodes. Friend, I'll tell you offline who I heard that from. Not entirely public, but it's, yeah. And the other thing that we want to look to keep our eye on, but it's definitely out of scope for Fusaka, is the IP 7701 native account abstraction for EOF. The account abstraction people want to put some custom features inside EOF to handle some of their specific needs with account abstraction. Specifically, when you do the authorization separate from the execution, they want to have a path such that it's only available for authorization unless you explicitly expose it. So there are some changes, some headers to have some different styles of entry points, and that's something that we could also use for things like progressive precompiles. So that entry point method is something that we could definitely add and use. And because it was designed on depend on things that are going to need to see how the world develops after it, those are definitely out of scope for Fusaka. Any comments on this plan? Any review points? Any requested revisions?
I agree on leaving 7701 out of scope, but I would I think it would be likely that rollups might want to do it. So might still be good to consider it. Maybe discuss some ideas during this year.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Is we're still in the design phase for it. Okay.
The only thing that I think is like a little bit of a weak point in this plan is the removal of the creation transaction. It's not exactly value additive. Like maybe it's just hard to explain it in that sense.
Yeah, it's more aligning it with the full abstraction and the idea to, I mean, it's something that, yeah, it is trimmable that we don't have to ship. We could. The thing is, if we're going to, once we ship the contract creation transaction with the changes supports EOF, we're going to have to support that forever, even if we turn it off on later forks. So this is on the idea of let's not add it since we haven't added it. But once it does get added, it's going to be there forever. And maybe it's a fine thing. Maybe it's a fine solution. But it's something that I want to have people discuss, that the idea that EOF only happens via contract transaction entries to kind of get the full, everything is on chain feel to it rather than having special interactions with basically the system housing the EVM. But yeah, that's good feedback that that might not be a necessary step, which is why it's a separate line item. But we'll see how. I mean, honestly, I could see going both ways in ACD. I could see some people on ACD saying, "Oh yes, absolutely, get rid of that. We don't want you to mess with that transaction logic." And others saying, but I want to use that. I don't want to have to change my developer tooling. So that's something why it's further down the road and why we want to put it out sooner rather than later. That's the plan. Okay, is there any objections to me sharing this at ACD either tomorrow or next Thursday? All right. If you do have a concern with it, just tell me, and I won't share it. But if the subject comes up on tomorrow's call, I'm going to whip this out to say here is the EOF plan, and if not tomorrow, definitely next Thursday when it's ACDC, to make it clear that this is how we're planning to go forward. Because we're probably going to have more Pector retrospective. Great. So, given that plan, my thought is we should look at features in order of how soon we need to ship them and how soon we need to discuss them. So the specification items will be done in that shipment order. We've got 20 minutes. I don't know how much we need to talk about the cleanup items. One thing that got added overnight, I don't think we have enough context to discuss it yet, is where was here we go. Powell's proposal for how we would change the header. The gist of it is we would encode in the first bit whether it's single value or multi-value, and the second change is we would get rid of all zero length headers. Powell?
Yeah, I mean, this is recent, so this is kind of attempt to improve the quality of this kind of generic header design, but because Andre have found an issue with this, and this is like some details. There are some details in the like why we have the data section as it is. I think we should discuss it offline, and maybe it's actually not a good idea to change anything. So yeah, I think it's not conclusive. That's good direction.
Okay. Only right.
In the end, I think when we do no change, it is also good. So definitely nothing that we can't ship with. And yeah, as you said, if you need to really consider like these 2 byte sizes, I think that's much more important thing to solve first, and then we can like beautify the like internals of the encoding.
Okay. What would the impact of going to a variable length bit size have on this? Variable length byte size, using one of the various VLQ or LEB 128 encodings.
I would say it's fine, or in general.
Okay.
This
Let me get the notes for
is
this.
mostly about the sub-containers, right? Because I guess we can live with the short functions. You can always scale, but adding more functions. But if the sub-container wants to be bigger than the 2 byte limit, this is kind of undoable if you want to put it inside another container. That's the
Yeah.
issue, right?
Yeah, because we could just have a 4 byte definition, or yeah, that's how we could figure that out. Okay, so that's stuff to noodle on for the call in 2 weeks. What else was on the list? Type sections having additional stack instead of total stack. Let me go to list of items.
Yeah, this is like quality of life improvement. It's relatively easy to do. I don't think there's a lot of test update needed. I mean, they will be updated in the bytecode, but we mostly have kind of like semantic description of the what's going on.
Okay. There's also, I think, Andre had some concerns about type malleability. If you could just increase the size of a code section from,
Yeah.
if it took only one
Yes.
stack, 17.
Yeah.
What was the proposal
Yeah.
again?
So the issue is that I've been reporting is that you can kind of artificially claim that you have multiple inputs and multiple outputs, and they somehow cancel out each other. So the function can be kind of empty and have only return, but you kind of like forward some number of virtually forward some number of input and output. And this is bad on like for 2 reasons. Why? First is kind of consistency. We try to avoid some like flexibility in the how would you describe the EOF program in the header and like in the all of this information around the code. For example, we don't allow unreachable instructions, we don't allow unreachable subcontainers and so on. And then we require like specific max stack height computed, not like the upper bound. So we kind of have like strict limits on different things, and this is kind of slipped, I think. So that's more or less the overview. I mean, there's also like I find it an issue when you want to convert the stack-based representation into register-based representation of your program. And then for the stack-based interpreter, it's kind of doesn't really matter so much. But if you want to convert the stack to registers, then it's easily to create a function that doesn't do anything, but somehow allocates a lot of registers. Also because we have like 128 inputs and outputs within the limit. So that is the concern, but I think Andrzej found potentially like useful use case for this thing. So like so I would put it this way: if there's a use case that helps compilers and otherwise they would need to work around it, the spec, I think it should stay as it is. So I think the job for the next week or two is to find reasonable use case for the current specification.
Now, is this something
if-
that a register conversion thing could check? They can see that there's, 2 used and 16 allocated. Could they check over the code and see that only 2 are needed and not create the other 14?
Yeah, potentially, but you can always kind of like make it awkward to do that. But even if the spec is changed, you can always make some other like very, very cheap instruction to actually use so you can put like long swap and or something in the function that is single instruction that put like theoretically use all of the inputs and outputs and doesn't do much. So
Right.
this argument for the compilation, it's not really strong. I think if someone wants to mess up the like some analysis or compilation, you can always do so to some limits. So I think there's not like strong evidence this is broken. That was my intuition at the beginning, but
Okay.
if you want to attack it, you will find a way to make it the same level of the same level of difficulty as it is right now. So it will not prevent abuse.
Okay.
So I would still put it in this like sanity validation rules. But if there's definitely usefulness in having this unpatched, I think we mostly need to find a reasonable description why this might be useful.
Okay. I think that's the only complex thing on this list because we are already discussing the init hash container, something we're already fixing. That's got a known solution. This is just a name. And the changing the data section index is part of the proposal for the container rework. So there's not too much other than the max stack height and the malleability issues. So what would be needed for this? Would this be amendment to the existing EIPs?
Yeah, I think all of this on the list except the EOF create, which I'm not fully aware of what the solution is, and if it's like solid one. I think all of them is kind of small changes to the existing EAPs. Yeah, for EOF create probably the same, although I'm not really fully familiar what is the end solution you will come up with.
Right. Okay. So once I get Osaka 0 off of my list, I'll probably pivot into getting some of these encoded, and other people are more than welcome to jump in, I guess, and get some of these worked on that. Okay. So I think that covers the fine-tuning questions. TX create. We have a in process EIP for TX create. Hasn't been merged yet. It's probably got some build issues, like they always do. Or we need to wait for the blessing from the editors. Yeah, so this will merge here in the next day or two, probably. But the EIP for TX Create is posted. Yeah, just some HTML Markdown issues. This is available for review, and I think it's got the new init code hash calculations. One question, I wish 0x was here. We're going to put in one toehold contract, I think is the goal with this. And my question for them would be which variants of the toehold we want so we can do the other toeholds off of this contract. And I think what we have specified in here is we're going to use the marker, and we're going to use the TX init code hash and assault and the init data. And we're going to use that as the final salt. So anything that is passed in for the creation of the contract goes into calculating the initial address. So that from there, we can create a set of well-defined total contracts. Might do things as simple as just have a salt and the calling address, or do fancy things like nodes lists, like not nodes lists, salt list creates that would use the pseudo nodes within the contract to help deploy from the various addresses. So that I think is the one open question that we would need. So let me put that in my notes.
I have some thoughts on this.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of the ERC based factories because it's not going to be guaranteed to be there. The factory, I mean. Even though like it's permissionless to deploy, and it would be deployable everywhere that this redeploy is present, right? The tooling cannot assume it to be there. And like it can be worked around, but it adds complexity. And so even though I think that kind of ERC based factory is going to exist, I just wouldn't make it a part of the EOF kind of proposal, because it's got this sort of flakiness and additional complexity that I don't think is very nice.
Okay, so would you want a big fancy precompile, or would you want a number of precompiles to decide what the
I think this
What's the total?
precompile is fine. Like it just recovers. I think it's got sort of the same properties that the current Create 2 has, right? So it just seems fine, and it would be like up to applications to do something else. And like the current ERC, or maybe it's a pre-ERC, might be fine. I just wouldn't make it like an official thing, like the way to do things. I think this
Okay.
contract should just be the way to do things in
Okay.
general.
So if you want to use the ERC, you would bring in a library in Solidity and not necessarily wire it into Solidity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Cool. I did have a bunch of open questions though about some weird interactions. So with this, if you go in with a delegate call, we only got 6 minutes, so those will be mostly thought processes. Should we block delegate call, or should we let them do delegate call? And the reason that's going to impact things is if you delegate call into the precompiled contract, actually our current rules prohibit that. So you can't ext delegate call into a precompiled contract. By rule, you'll fail. So this is actually almost a moot issue. But if you did it from legacy into here, you could still do that. And that would change the address part. So you would be creating into a different namespace depending upon who your delegate calling into. Another option is we could explicitly allow this delegate call to be available, and that would make your address a function of your address. of the calling contract. So there's one possibility there to get a personal namespace collision-free deployment. Any thoughts on that? Oh, wait, no, this will be fine because it's a pre-deploy, not a pre-compile. This code will be on the chain, so you could exe delegate call into it. That's so many things moving in my mind. But if you exe delegate call into this, you'll get a different address space. Is that a feature or a bug? I guess is the question.
For me, sounds like a feature, like a useful one.
Yeah, it can be nice. It can be useful. It's like a nice to have.
Okay. So we
It
don't
may be
need
potential
to.
for confusion, like the different way this behaves with
Right.
call and delegate call. But I don't know if it's grounds to disallow it.
Right. Maybe put a nice large warning in Solidity, make sure you know what you're doing. Or it could be the default. I mean, that's another thing we might want to consider.
It's like the same with current factories with Create too.
Yep.
Not a new issue.
Okay. All right. Because most of my follow-ons were, I think, already has handled. Is address hashing okay with everyone? Is total contract okay with everyone? Do we need another toehold variance? I don't think we do. Okay. Any other questions for TX Create? No, we don't have much time.
Just a little bit of a note on the delegate call thing. If it was
Mhm.
like mandatory to use delegate call, it's kind of more similar to the way that the create opcodes work, right? So it's nice in that way, but it does seem very weird in terms of the rest of the system that there's this pre-deploy that you can only delegate call into. I'm not sure it's going to be
Yeah.
nice for people.
And the delegate call, non-delegate call does provide the option for a standard toehold address, regardless of who creates it. So I still see value in allowing non-delegate calls.
Totally, that's true.
So that makes it really easy for cross-chain addresses to be fixed because you can call it with an ext call and you get the same address regardless of address you're calling from. So done right, I mean, we almost are able to retire Nick's method for EOF. Okay. We've only
Love
got
to
2
hear
minutes
that.
left, so go ahead.
No, I'm just saying I love to hear that. I think Nick's method does need to be retired.
Okay. Since we only have 2 minutes left, I'm not going to address any of the rest of them. That was the metadata section, the ext code type, and also the potential code address opcode, ext code address opcode. So that would need to have a spec. But I'd like to thank everyone for calling in. We're filling up the meeting time. Hopefully we don't need to go to weekly meetings. I don't think we'll need that, but crunch time might happen. We might need to call some special ones. But I'd like to thank everyone for the work they've been putting in. Looks like we're going to be able to ship this year, if there's another fork this year. So thanks, and see everyone in 2 weeks.